I might as well get to the point. I met Baba in 1956, and the prelude to it was, in my mind, magical. In 1955, we started building a house 35 miles from Manhattan, and it got more and more stressful. There was absolutely no money. I don't know what we were thinking of. And in the meantime, my sister had seen God Speaks, the book, in the window of a bookstore on Fifth Avenue. And this was just before Christmas, maybe November of '55. And she sent a copy to Henry and Keecha Kashouti, got a copy for herself, and proceeded to enjoy the entire experience while I was suffering worse and worse and worse 35 miles away from her. I, in March, found a small bird on my lawn that was injured. And not knowing why, I got very involved with the bird. I tried treating it. We ended up bandaging it, sending for worms, going to the Audubon Society. This just was a total focus of my life, and I think I was having a total breakdown with the bird. This was March. By July, the Audubon Society really was fed up with me. Everyone else was. The bird was bandaged from head to toe. The worms I had sent for had gotten loose in the basement. They were all over the place. Of course, there was even less money. We were still working on the house. It was totally unfinished when we moved in. So the pressure was really mounting. And my sister called one day and said, "You've got to come into New York and visit this master. It's just the most wonderful experience." I thought, she is totally out of her mind. She is just, how could we meet someone so special? Who are we to meet anyone like this? And at the same time, the Audubon Society called me and said, "We have the most perfect Birdman for you. He's in Manhattan on the east side." And then my sister had said, Meher Baba who? Is at the Delmonico Hotel on 63rd Street. And the Birdman was something like 75th Street on First Avenue. So I thought, wow, I'll kill two birds with one stone. I will do this. I will do it. And it was just, I was married to a very intolerant, abusive man, and I thought, this has to be good. I couldn't go in just to see Meher Baba without a good reason. And he was getting a little fed up with this bird. So I remember standing in the front yard. It was a Saturday morning, so that was okay. My daughter was off. My daughter Deirdre was off from school, and she was 9 years old and maybe getting tired of the attention the bird was getting, certainly confused. And I remember giving my husband one more chance and seeing him a little torn. And then he said, "No, I've got work to do around here." And so we proceeded to go in the city with the bird in a bird cage and the child on the right hand, and made our way to the Delmonico Hotel from Grand Central Station. People were noticing the bird all the way, bandages and all. You couldn't, I mean, it was really, I don't know what I was thinking, but I was drawn. So I thought, well, I'll go to the hotel first and get that over with. And they were giving appointments to people to see Baba. And when I went to the second floor of the Delmonico, I was very impressed. I saw Adele, I saw Phyllis, and then Fred and Ella. And there was something about them that was so lovely. And I was very impressed. They didn't ask for money. Adele looked at the bird and said, "Oh, you've got to take the bird in to see Baba. He loves animals." Well, that was wonderful. And then I looked at the discourses, and they had all these books, and they were very kind. The room was actually L-shaped. I entered at, where would it be? Up on the height of the L. And then where the foot would be it was a corner, and I couldn't see that. But there were chairs just before you turn that corner, and there were rows of chairs for people who were waiting to see Baba. But I was getting more and more impressed with the lovely people there. In the meantime, I think what they call a billboard was Poor me, I'm always suffering, and I couldn't find the love I was looking for. And of course, I picked an abusive person. It didn't help. So the first thing I did, Fred handed me, I think, the discourses, and I opened it. It was just like opening a Bible and getting your answer. But I read where we're responsible for 95% of our own suffering, and I thought, I just could not believe this. I could not believe that I was hit with my billboard immediately. But anyway, it was getting time to see Baba, and we turned, went down, sat in the chair for a few moments, and then they called my name, and I picked up Child and Bird, and we turned a corner, and my first thought was, what a cheap trick. They have Klieg lights on him. He's all lit up. And I thought, oh, how dramatic. And I looked up, and there were no lights there. And when I turned, the light was coming. Baba was so illuminated. And I immediately knew that it was perfect he didn't speak. Someone had, in essence, warned me that he didn't speak. But it was perfect. And I knew I'd come home. There was something I'd been looking for. I didn't even have a clue as to what I'd been looking for from the time I could remember. And I had come home. He was perfect, so familiar. And not gradually, but rather quickly, everything started to disappear. And I bent over to kiss him. And my thought was, anyone looking at me would wonder why I was kissing a stranger, and he was not a stranger. But right then and there, as I was experiencing this divine ecstasy, I hear a voice saying, Baba wants you to have some prasad. And I'm going like this, just don't bother me. But I realized later I might have just been losing it completely. And I did take the grape. We all had grapes as prasad. And I suddenly thought it's time to ask him a question, but I knew that he knew what I was thinking. And my question was, what is all this suffering about? I was devastated by the bird suffering, my own, everything else, living through World War II, knowing everything that we can go through on this earth. And I knew he would answer me. He did give me an order, and that was, Eric said, Baba wants you not to worry and to be happy. Which seems very easy, doesn't it? And I was totally, totally fulfilled. It was all I could take in. I absolutely could not have taken another second with him. And I turned, and then I met Henry and Keisha and my sister. Wasn't it wonderful? And I said, I'd follow him to the ends of the earth. He came out, walked to the elevator. I never even followed him to Myrtle Beach. I don't know from then on, I have never known what I was talking about. I was just absolutely, I never knew what I was going to come out with and what would come. It was much freer association after meeting him. It was just some real self was coming out. It was not too swift. So we went home and we waited and waited. It was always kept in a state of excitement as to when we would see him next. I had a family, but those who didn't and who were single really parked their lives and waited to go to India. We also felt we'd be called to work there or get rid of our lives, whatever was uncomfortable, that we would go to India. And of course that didn't happen, but the Sahabas was planned for 58, and then you know about the accident he had and the injuries. And he still had the Sahabas in India, I think, in 57, and was planning on coming here in July. I met him in July in 56. In 58, it was May, about May 20th, that we were due to see him. So we all got ready to drive down to see Bob. Oh, by the way, the bird had to be euthanized. I was torturing it to hell, trying to keep it alive. It was as though the most important thing for me was preserving life at all costs. And so I came to grips with that problem. It was a good learning experience. So anyway, waiting for Baba to come, we had our meetings. We came down here many times in the interim and stayed on the center. It was wonderful. Kitty would come and open up the place, and just a few of us would gather here and waiting for Baba. It was wonderfully intimate. And we were playful. We stayed up all night, which is not, I think we forced them to put some rules down because of the noise we made at night. And so the time came to come and see Baba, and we gathered on the beach, which we weren't supposed to do. We were to come in to the center when we were called. But we gathered on the beach, and before we went to the beach, we brought a friend from Chappaqua, New York, who saw my copy of Perfect Master in a shopping wagon and had been very interested in spiritual life and came down to see Baba with us. And she was at the motel, and she very briefly asked us before we went to the beach, how did you get those suntans of yours? And this was skiing that we got our suntans. And we said Vaseline, and we simply ignored her. And then went onto the beach with her, and she had covered herself with Vaseline before we went to the beach. And she was covered with sand that we couldn't get off of her. And we were to come in and see Baba when he called. And there was some real hysterics in the meantime, knives scraping, and we just couldn't get and she was furious with us. But we didn't know why she put the Vaseline on. On a hot, it was warm weather. So anyway, we got the Vaseline off, but the pressure was awful, and we did race back onto the center. And we were the first to see Baba, thank heavens. Our names, which makes me very happy, it's proof that I was there, the first in the guest book. And sometimes when I forget, I realize, well, we really were there. And then we went into the cabin, my sister, some of the people we brought down, this lady, Olivia Mom, Dee Dee, my sister and myself, let's see, a few other people. In the meantime, my parents were so against Baba, it was mad. It was a kind of madness. They really hated him, resented him. And I thought they didn't know we were coming down. And John Bass comes along and introduces us to Baba. And I was very upset. I said, he knows who I am. He met me already. And I thought, all of a sudden, I got, a little annoyed. And then John starts, we have a letter from the parents, and they're very unhappy that they've come down. I said, where did he get this information? We don't know. And your mother went to the hospital for an operation. What operation? He went on, and Baba turns, instead of saying, greeting me, he looked at me and said, don't you think you're selfish? Don't you see me in everyone? And it was such a blow. But all I thought was my parents had said they would disinherit us. Well, it wasn't a very big inheritance in the first place. And I could be very honorable about it. Oh, I just stood up on my high horse and I said, but Baba, it was for money. And then he said, never for money. And my sister said, does that mean we should go back home again, Baba? And we heard him laugh. He chuckled. He went, we heard this little chuckle. I still can't do it. And I thought, oh, my sister, why did she say these things instead of fighting for her right to be here? And I thought this. And then he said, okay. And he went on to each one of us. And there was one lady who'd been in Vedanta, had hidden out in the forests of Warsaw during the war. I don't know if any of you know the story of some of the people who left the ghetto and actually spent 2 winters in the Polish cold. And this woman had been through so much, was a Vedantist. And Baba turned to her and said, tell me what you know. And she started this stream of words. I could not believe it. Where did they come from? This intellectual stuff. And it went on and on and on. And as she spoke, her hair tumbled down. She had hairpins. And she was just getting more and more upset. And then he said to her, of course through Erich, "Don't you know it's love and just love alone that counts?" And she just turned into the most wonderful puddle of love and tears. The moments with him were so intense, so full of learning. Just for a split second, he would look at you and the most brilliant realization could come through your mind. So that was our first meeting with him in the Lagoon cabin. There were many other people coming in who were meeting that day, and so we came out and just sat in the compound. And I think from that moment on, I started my exposition of great knowledge. I don't know, for a few days, I was talking as though I understood everything that was happening. It just seemed so easy to do once you'd gotten to that level. Oh boy. So, but we met others and we waited to be called, literally waited, and spent time with each other. And time did go very strangely. We were not aware of food. We thought we could live like that the rest of our lives. And this was day after day. Then we met in the barn. You can read either Purdam's book or read The Awakener that Phyllis Frederick wrote if you want to hear all the intellectual stuff. But Baba said all the discourses gave him a headache. And he wanted to listen to music. And my sister had built a hi-fi set. In those days, you put it together yourself. And we brought it down with us, and we set it up in the barn. And people brought records. Beryl Williams brought wonderful spirituals. They were so beautiful. Marian Anderson. Oh, I couldn't remember the other singer. Maybe Bob would. We had all kinds of musical entertainment. What was their name? Max and Giselle Hefflinger brought recordings of The Highest of the High from Appenzell, which is a district of Switzerland, and the church bells ringing from the Grossmünster Church, famous bells in Zurich. And then I remember also Jane coming in with her children and meeting Baba, and it was an astounding thing to see them come in. Let's see. Oh, I forgot my punchline. I said to you, remind me about punchlines. Actually, the meeting with Baba at the Delmonico with the bird, afterward I took the bird and my daughter to the Birdman up on the Upper East Side. And even on the bus, some woman knew it was a robin. And I got to this bird expert that was supposed to be the reason for my trip. And when I walked in, he looked at it and he said, "What kind of bird is that?" So it was to me, it was bait and hook, and, it was just a hook with the baited hook that Baba used to get me there because I was so really skeptical. I really was. I just could not believe this could happen. Well, the time that we were here was so exquisite, sitting in the barn with Baba and listening to music with him. There was, can you believe, a moment when someone played the Begin. You could hear the tide coming in, birds singing, an orchestra playing on the beach, might as well have been there. He loved those moments, he shared them. There was a time when it was, let me see, what was the day? I just have to think of it. Anniversary of Pentecost. And Baba had forgiven us for all our sins. I still don't know quite if it was up to that moment or are we still off scot-free. But I took it very quickly, but some woman raised her hand and said, some woman raised her hand and said, "Would you please do that again?" He got upset. There were times when I saw him upset, and I don't think he did it again. I think, and then some woman said, "This is anniversary of Pentecost. What does that mean?" And really, I think the message we were getting from Baba was that this was a brand new dispensation. And it didn't seem right to carry our baggage. I did for years, Christian, whatever you were, I was Christian. And this was a mournful thing. The Christ was a figure of suffering. And Baba did suffer, but he also had a tremendous sense of humor. We had what we called a non-birthday party, and it was that party for the public and the children right out here. And I thought it was necessary, at least internally, to ask Baba permission to take pictures of him. And as I was taking pictures, he faded in and out like a Cheshire cat. And it was I don't see things that way, I'm very gross. But it was absolutely exquisite the way he faded from the back to the front and then resumed his vibrations, I guess, and came back into, it wasn't just focus, he just reappeared. And he turned and smiled at me as though, did you like that? It was very quick. Also, that same time, it was Fred Marks, who was about 7 feet tall and very gawky and very shy, who was pushing me on a swing, and it was like Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy, and I thought, and then playing Getting to Know You from The King and I, The Children with the Birthday, and my sister was very proud. She was an athlete. She played every sport, and she played teams, and Baba was throwing candies at people to catch. And she was at the end of a long table, and she was so full of it, she could catch a ball just any way she wanted to. And he looked the other way, he always did that. And he would look away and then throw something at you. He'd look at one person and throw candy at someone else. And you had to be sharp to pick it up. And she thought she was ready, and this gumdrop came, hit the table in front of her, and walked this way and that way and this way, and she kept trying to chase it down. She said she never saw anything have a mind of its own like that. It just kept moving away from her. And so it was an absolutely beautiful, beautiful non-birthday. And most of the time with Bobby, you felt as though you were really at some other level. You really had to be another. My mind slowed down almost completely. I invited about 40 people to come back in a small car with us to New York. And then he would call the dancers in to the Lagoon cabin when work got heavy for him. And you'd hear this wild laughter. And feel so guilty, because every time I went in to see Baba, the tears would flow. And here were these people who could bring such laughter to him. Anytime he needed relief from the weeping ones, I think he would call the dancers in. So we had this happening. And then I had forgotten, but there was a circular that said Baba didn't want any gifts. And somehow or other, I didn't see that again until we were here. But when I was in New York, we first got that circular. And then someone, I still don't know who they are. Does anyone know who the sewing circle was? And they came to me and said, would you please make some handkerchiefs? Make some things for Baba, pillowcases and handkerchiefs. So I justified buying a new sewing machine. I needed one. And it wasn't for me, no. It was for Baba that I bought the machine. Not having any money. And so I did buy this machine. It had embroidery stuff, and the more I worked on the stuff, the uglier it got, and the threads and the knots, and it got wrinkled, it got pulled. But anyway, I finally had my little package of linen hankies ready to bring to Baba. They said, bring it down, and we will all go in as the sewing circle and bring him these gifts. I think they used the word gifts. As I entered the Lagoon cabin with the evidence in my hand, I realized that he said no gifts. And I was stuck. There was no place to go. I went up against the back wall, not the sink, but the other side, And I stood with my back to him, and there was no place to go. It was the end. Jiggers, the cops, I was caught. And that's what I thought, the hound of heaven. I'll never be able to get out of here. He'll chase me down through the whole universe. Exactly the first thing I did was not even obey. I couldn't obey. And so I sucked it up. I really did. I said, okay, what are you going to do, ruin your life over this? And I turned around, and he was smiling. And so we presented our gifts. But it was a really, really awful moment of realizing how hard it would be to obey. And that he wouldn't even, and that was the moment when I turned and realized what it meant to be in a position to obey him as his close ones, his Mandali, did. And when I looked at him, I got a reassurance in the phrase from Baba, it's for me to know and you to find out. It's okay, and you'll get there. And there was a lot of disobedience, there still is. But there's some I could forgive myself too because of that moment. It was still sticky. It was very sticky. Let me see. And then we were on the beach one day. This was a wonderful day. We were all racing on the beach. There are some drawings and some paintings by the sign maker that are wonderful. And suddenly Baba had the dancers, he went like this on the shoulders, and it was Donald and it was Tex, and he had them put his chair down. And he had the women, and fortunately I was right there on the left, and he had the women pick his chair up. Well, first of all, Jane and Agnes Barron were in the back. Jane was so tall. And the poles were higher in the back than they were in the front. And suddenly, they picked up the chair, and we hadn't picked up the front, and Baba starts pitching forward, and I threw my arm around his knees and said, "Don't worry, Baba, I'll save you." The moment I said it, I was so, and he was going, "Ooh, ooh." And then I couldn't stop with that one. Oh no, I had to really make a fool of myself. And it really didn't mean it the way it sounded. But I wanted to say, I had seen pictures of the ladies in India, and they're tiny and they're delicate. And it was Agnes Barron, it was Jane, it was me that were hockey players. We were a bunch of American women. And I knew it was wrong when I said it. And I said, "Don't worry, Baba, I'll save you. We American women are strong." And I swear to God, the moment I said it, I realized that I had absolutely decided to join some terrible, terrible death force, that I was doomed. It was just though I had volunteered for an army that had no hope. I should never have said that. We were sent in to fight to the death. Why did I say that? Anyway, I managed to survive that one. And I think he enjoyed the ridiculousness of the whole thing. Then there was the time when he walked out of the Lagoon cabin. We were standing in line, and he wanted to show us that he could walk, and he was in terrible pain. It was after the second accident. And I thought to myself, "Oh, Baba, you don't have to do this. You don't have to show us this." And he comes right up to me, and through Erich, he said, the bliss, you don't know the bliss." And I really was surprised very much by that, by how quick he was to know and to, he not only reassured me, it shamed me a little bit that I was thinking he didn't have to do something. I was interfering. Then one night there were terrible thunderstorms. The next day in the barn, he asked around, then he pointed to me, and I was up a lot that night thinking Baba was out in the storm, and he wanted me to say it. I still don't understand what that meant, but he really wanted me to say, "Baba, I felt you were out in that storm all night. And he did say he had a hard night of, the work. We also were saying, as we were visiting with each other all the time, that we could stay there forever with him. And suddenly one day the pressure had mounted so much, and knowing us better than we knew ourselves, he announced, "You can all go out to dinner tonight," and we hit the road as though we had escaped from prison. It was such a charged atmosphere that as just average human beings, you just couldn't take it anymore. It was so exquisite, but my mind was almost stopped the entire time. I was about as dense as you could get, but sharp. It was hard to explain how you cannot think and still walk around. So we went to dinner, and we couldn't believe there was silverware on the table, and there was salt and pepper, and we were oohing and eyeing, and we did come back to the center. The timing was just right to relieve the pressure of being here like that, because being with him was was on such a high vibration. That's all I could say. It was beyond anything we could tolerate for that length of time. Anyway, coming back, we had, let me think. Oh, there was a time when I was in the Lagoon cabin with him, and I gave a thought about Anne Conlon, who was left at home. She didn't come to the 58, and she was almost ready. I had been talking to her for several years about Baba, and I was too polite. She was raised a Catholic, and I was afraid of scaring people to death. So we were in the cabin, and he suddenly turned to me and said, "What do you do?" And I was thinking of Anne, and I don't know where these words came from. I said, I was fishing. I was trying to find out if she was ready to hear about Baba and not be terribly upset. She was a Catholic. And he said, "Fine." And before you knew it, I think you all know Anne's story, how she was welcomed and how everything worked out. So that was another thing that happened. Another time, we noticed that Baba was walking from the Lagoon cabin. There were some rose bushes there and the thorns, and he was headed right for the thorns. No one had noticed it. And just before he walked by, the bushes started moving away from him. It was a moment of seeing a super, I don't know how to explain, how when he walked, he sort of floated. This is the hardest thing for me to say. There was the most powerful reality about him, but also a kind of lightness about his physical being. It changed. And also this walking through the rose bushes but not touching them, and it didn't even pull on his sadra, but he was headed right for them. They parted. It was a little upsetting too, to say the least. The playground. Elizabeth had the most wonderful way of knowing what to do for people, and there was a man here at the North Myrtle Beach by the name of Joe Blake, who'd been with Red Book magazine, and they had that the search for communists and all. He had lost his job. Red Book magazine was considered a communist magazine. He came down here totally lost, broken, and Elizabeth gave him a job with the children. He's a communist probably, but a job with the children. So, and he had the playground. And really, after a day or two, he wanted to be in the barn with us, and my daughter Deirdre was the one who had, it wasn't a small insurrection, it was rather big. She was not going to take playing in the playground while Baba was here, and we were in the barn with him. So the children were invited in as long as they knew to sit and be quiet. And so Deirdre came in to the barn, sat with Baba. I have to tell you one story, and Does anyone know Faye Fisher? Did anyone know her? Yes. Faye asked me, yeah.
In the bar?
Oh, yes. Faye asked me, probably in the 80s, she said, I want to ask you something. I did something terrible. I asked Baba to prevent suffering from me. She said, I didn't think I could handle extreme suffering. And it was then that I could tell her that we saw her sitting at Baba's feet on the floor with, the Indian style, with her skirt really wide open. And Baba was twirling a flower, twirling a flower, twirling a flower, and then threw it in her lap. And she didn't know what that had meant. That was 1958. And in 1980, she's asking me, do you think it was wrong for me to have asked Baba at that time to please spare me suffering? And my sister saw this gesture, went outside later, and found this flower, and it was a thistle. It was full of thorns, and it really hurt. But he had cleaned off all the thorns and thrown them on to her dress. And so when I was able to tell her that, because she had a very quiet life until she died. And so, he fulfilled her wish, but he took the thorns. And so those were the moments with Baba that you could see. There were so many. And some of them you finally get a meaning from, some of them you never go. Some of them unfold as you go on through life. But he sets, I think of, what is it, the children who go to the witch's house with the trail? You leave the candy. But Hansel and Gretel, thank you. And you have a trail that you can follow the rest of your life, and you finally find a gumdrop and say, oh my God, that was set back, God knows when that gumdrop was put there. But it's still leading me on. Joe Blake had quite an awakening with Baba. Oh, there was an anniversary of Pentecost, and Baba forgave us everything. And someone raised her hand and said, or him, ask him to repeat it. And that was the darkest expression I ever saw on Baba. I think it upset him terribly when you couldn't accept the immediate gift he gave. It was very difficult. It was a very difficult moment when someone said, please do it again. So, trying to remember anything else. That was the sewing circle, by the way. I don't know where we got that benighted idea that we would take these gifts to Baba, but it turned out all right. Oh, we went down to the Brotherhood of something or other, not of Eagles, but all these men's clubs, these men's institutions, and they had a theater there, and we were to see a film that Charmy and Deuce had made. And Baba warned us, this was so serious. Oh, this was so serious. And Baba warned us before we went. He said in the barn, we're going to go, and this is very important that you don't fall asleep. And we thought of the night in the garden in Gethsemane, and I thought, oh, we put ourselves on such a level of seriousness. And we got there, and it must have been 150 degrees in the auditorium, and Charmian had made a film called The Ocean of Love, and she had put seashells out on the beach saying, Ocean of Love, may her Baba. And she filmed the tide coming in and out and in and out and in and out. And the words are, don't fall asleep, or stay up in the garden, watch me. And the Christian stuff was coming rolling in through our heads. And it was just, my head was going like this. The heat was unbearable. He could pull our legs. He really also had a sense of humor. He really kept you jumping. You didn't know when he's going to show disappointment in you or really pull. Yeah. I think I mentioned that I asked everyone to come back in the car with us to New York. I was just not thinking. My mind was slowed down. That was quite a gift I had. It wasn't judgmental, and I did come up with a lot of stupid stuff. But it was such a blessing. It wasn't critical, and I really was able to accept it, thanks to Baba. And I also had, looking at you, it was a wonderful experience really realizing you were his and not mine. It's a way of dumping your kids. Unload your children. Unload your children on God, that's all. They're too much responsibility. I forget that still. And then there was, there was the pain of that universal work after the comedy show. We had that burlesque show that the men gave, and then we went outside the barn in the compound. Oh, and then we came here. And suddenly Baba's mood changed, and we came here, and he told us later, he was sharing in his universal work with us. But it was for a lot of people, it was frightening, it was confusing, because he left us completely. His body was there, but he left us. And this is what he meant by sharing his universal work. He had us. And Joe Blake, who was very worldly, he'd been editor of the Red Book magazine. This was no simpleton. This was a man who was in New York literary society. And he said he had never seen anything like it. There were 200 and some people who didn't panic because Baba's removal from us could have panicked you. I think one person did, and she was helped. But he said he had shared his universal work with us. And it was quite a while before you could get over it. My mind went to many different places, to say the least, not quite understanding it. We certainly didn't lose ourselves. Only one person became slightly hysterical. We accepted it and had something to think about for a long time after seeing him like that, totally gone from us. His form was there, but he was gone. I told you about the beach and how we carried his chair at the beach and almost lost him. The women in back were so tall, when they lifted the chair, they simply pitched him forward, and I know it was anti-gravity forces, because he wasn't holding on to the chair. He was going like this, and the balance was totally off. The last day, we all got on a bus and went to the airport, and this was very difficult. Very, very, very hard. Before we left, let me see what words, the last words he told us were, go out in the world, forget all the discourses, live, love, fight, be natural, be yourself, but never forget all this is Baba's. And that was the last thing in the barn. And many discourses, you can read them in The Awakener magazine. Phyllis wrote up every word of the discourses in the barn. And there was music, there were other moments with Baba. Also, which book was it? This God-Man. And this Sahavas was there with the 56. There's a whole chapter. I happen to always have preferred, what's his name? Yeah, Charles Purdam's version, but it was very much like that, but only the surface. It was the intellectual part, the discourses. Baba said they gave him a headache. He loved the music. He really loved the music, and we sat and listened to music together. We went to the airport to see him off. It was the first time and the last time I saw Duncan, William Duncan. He didn't come out and see the Sahabas, but at that moment he was there, and he really was very familiar and very, he was gone. The person was gone. There was something else there that was really exquisite, and he stood back at it was at the airport, and we sat around Baba, really quiet, and it was that it could have been 2 people, family members, or 3 people, instead of 100 and some people, who were so quiet and so in touch and so loving, and knowing for some of us that could be the last time that we saw Baba. And that was the 58 Sahabas. Thank you. You were eager to talk to. That was that much of it. Thank you.